And for more on this story, I'm joined by Jessica Tilipman. She is an anti-corruption professor at George Washington University Law School. I'm also joined by Caroline Polisi. She's a federal and white-collar criminal defense attorney. So, Professor Tilipman, let's start with you. What do you make of this argument from Menendez that the reason authorities found thousands of dollars hidden away in his home is because he's just an old-fashioned guy who felt safer with cash?
Well, obviously, he has to point to something to explain piles of cash found in jackets and envelopes in his home. So this looks like the excuse or the defense he's going with, at least for now. It didn't quite get to the gold bars. Most people don't keep those hanging around their house very often. And he didn't get to some of the other items like the car. But, at least for his initial statement, this seems to be a lukewarm defense.
And also prosecutors could hear that and verify his statements, right? Did he withdraw this money from these banks? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the indictment points to the fact that there's DNA evidence on some of the cash. Look, ultimately, we've seen this fact pattern before in these types of cases. If a receptacle can carry cash, it's been used, whether it's been a freezer, a bathtub, or a trunk. There's always these types of cases where people are trying to stuff cash to hide it when they're engaged in some sort of alleged bribery scheme. So it's going to be pretty difficult for him to get around this, particularly when they're pointing to physical evidence in the indictment. But again, at least this is his attempt to try to explain it away.
So, Caroline, what do you think about the fact he talked about the cash found in his home, but not the Mercedes, not the gold bars? And a reminder for our viewers, the indictment alleges he Googled how much a gold bar was worth after a trip to Egypt.
Yeah, a lot of really damning evidence in this indictment, Pam. And as the professor knows quite well, since 2016 in this country, there was a Supreme Court case, United States versus McDonald, in which the court really tamped down on prosecutors' ability to bring charges of this nature, not entirely, but they really narrowed the landscape in how they could charge. And what prosecutors are going to have to show is a quid pro quo, so a thing of value, which obviously a Mercedes-Benz and gold bars are, in exchange for what's known as an official act, or in this case, a breaching of an official act. And that's what's really in this indictment. I think the government will have no problems getting over that hurdle. They have shown time and time again in many different ways how Menendez both breached his acts, breached his official duty, and used his office to influence others in order to, really benefit himself and his other co-conspirators.
I want to go back looking at the Menendez defense that we heard from him today. Professor Senator Menendez defended his record on Egypt. He explained that he has been in the country. He's pressed it on human rights violations, basically trying to make the case undermine this idea that he would do any favors for Egypt in exchange for gifts. In your view, how strong of a defense is that?
Well, certainly he will be able to point to some things that he's done, but it's belied by the statements in the indictment, which point to covert activity that he was engaged in to effectively aid the country of Egypt and obviously these businessmen as well. I mean, I think it gets to the point that when you're dealing with a corruption case, all this stuff comes behind closed doors with winks and nods. This isn't stuff out in the open like some of the public things he's been able to point to. This is the stuff behind the scenes. And my colleague is correct. It's going to be far more difficult for the Justice Department to bring a case like this in light of decades of Supreme Court cases that have basically narrowed the application of these criminal statutes to prosecute domestic corruption cases in the United States. So they have a high hurdle, an even higher hurdle than they normally would in corruption cases. These are more difficult cases to bring. But here again, he's pointing to something he's done publicly to try to discount the allegations in the indictment that show that that allege that he's effectively been campaigning covertly on behalf of the Egyptian government all this time in exchange for bribes.
Yeah, talk a little bit expand on that, Caroline, about the complications for prosecutors here in making the case. Look, yeah, he had a big role on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but this goes beyond just trying to, influence policy. It's a big hurdle.
It is. And, I think one thing that we're not talking about in this conversation is that, Menendez faced very similar charges in the District of New Jersey previously. And, there was a hung jury and he was later acquitted on most of those charges. So he has beat these types of charges. And the argument that he will make this time is going to be similar in that it doesn't meet this high bar, this, overt quid pro quo, a handing of money, a shake of a hand in exchange for an official act. Basically, he's arguing, look, it's swampy. These are the types of things I do all the time. I don't think it's going to work. It's very hard to, fend off charges of this nature one time. I think it's even, almost impossible to do it twice. So, look, he's been under investigation. I think it's interesting. They started looking at him immediately after he was acquitted of those charges in 2018. So this conduct runs immediately from 2018 through 2022.
Yeah, that really stuck out to me too. Jessica Tilipman, Caroline Pelosi, thanks for offering your insights.